case of Venezuela, a lot of information, a lot of news coming out of Venezuela talking about New York Times every time they come with a news story. And they said that the United States, the president of the United States, has decided to let CIA do its mission in Venezuela in order to overthrow the Maduro, the president of Venezuela. They said they came out today or yesterday with this story that Venezuela is ready, Maduro is ready to cooperate with Donald Trump in terms of oil and gold, minerals, all they have. And then Donald Trump just said no. There is no possibility in that direction to go in that direction. Here is, let me, before going to your comment, here is what we've heard from the Republican senator and Rick Scott, what he said on Fox News.
I think if Maduro's smart, he's going to go ahead and move to Russia or China, someplace like that, because his days are numbered. The public of Venezuela don't want him. They rejected him in the last election. He stole the election. He's a dictator. He's a drug cartel leader. So his days are numbered. However they do it, I look forward to the day that he's no longer in Venezuela. It'll be great for the world.
So lawmakers.
Yeah. It seems that everything's ready to overthrow, and after the Nobel Peace Prize, and then.
Well, this is pretty incompatible with the Nobel Peace Prize because it is a brutal reenactment of American intervention in the hemisphere. I think many people would agree that Nicolas Maduro has not been very good for Venezuela. He is not an admirable leader in many ways, but he is the leader of Venezuela. And it's a matter of grave, it's a overweening ambition for a senator from Florida to declare that he's illegitimate and had to be overthrown and should take refuge somewhere else. What gives the senator from Florida the right to say that? Either we have a rule of law or we don't. And it's pretty clear that in the case of Venezuela, the administration is acting entirely unilaterally. It's also very clear that the impetus behind this is largely driven by our Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, who has had as an objective the overthrow of the Maduro regime and the end of its ties with Cuba as an objective for a long time. The Senate of the United States came within 2 votes of declaring that President Trump had no right to kill people on the high seas on the basis of no apparent evidence at all, just assertions. But it failed by 2 votes, which is extraordinary. And it demonstrates the fecklessness of the U.S. Congress, the breakdown of checks and balances in the American political system, and the departure of the United States from international law.
I think we can say Donald Trump's foreign policy, is somehow a gambler policy, because he tries to gamble. When it came to Iran, he decided to let Netanyahu attack Iran. And he thought that Netanyahu would overthrow the government in Iran. The attack on Doha, it was, in my opinion, that was a huge move on his part to let Netanyahu attack in Doha, to kill Hamas leaders. And right now, with the case of Venezuela, do you think it's a new gamble for Donald Trump?
Looks very much like it is. There's been a long-standing American objective for decades under both Democratic and Republican presidents to change the government in Caracas. It has never succeeded. There have been some fairly wild maneuvers conducted to this end, like declaring the head of the National Assembly the actual president, and supporting various candidates to succeed first Hugo Chavez Frias, who was the inspiration for Chavismo, an ideology of Bolivarian autocracy, and then Nicolas Maduro, his deputy, who succeeded to the office. None of these efforts to change the government of Venezuela have succeeded. And I think many of the premises on which American policy is based are highly questionable. I don't think it's right to say, as Senator Scott did, that the people of Venezuela don't want Maduro. He has a 4.5 million man and woman armed militia who are supporting him. That is a substantial portion of the urban population of Venezuela. Of course, conditions in Venezuela, under heavy sanctions from the United States for many years now, are pretty dire. And some 7 million Venezuelans have fled the country and sought refuge elsewhere, including in the United States, but many of them in other countries, Brazil, Chile, and so forth and so on. Venezuela is in a very difficult situation, and it's easy to understand how Nicolas Maduro might be willing to offer its natural resources, its oil, its gold, the llanos, the cattle ranching area, and so forth, to American companies, and thus to Donald Trump and his cronies in the White House, who seem to be able to derive profit from American foreign policy wherever they attempt it. It's very easy to understand that. On the other hand, what's driving this antipathy to Venezuela is not an economic interest so much as ideological, and specifically the antipathy to Cuba and objections to the relationship that Venezuela has to Cuba. So it's not surprising also that Donald Trump is not interested in an economic deal.
Those people who are concerned about the case of Venezuela, they talk about Vietnam and the war in Vietnam, because Venezuela, the terrain is somehow difficult if they decide to go underground, if they decide to do some sort of military operations. Here is the former CIA officer, case officer Ralph McGee, and he's talking about the role of CIA. And here is what he said, because it's related to my next question I'm asking.
Is not an intelligence agency, it's a covert action agency. Covert action being overthrowing or supporting foreign governments. Another part of covert action is disinformation. And the American people, in my estimation, are the primary target audience of the agency's disinformation operation. And I view Vietnam, the entire Vietnam War, was brought to us, sold to us, by agency disinformation operations. When I say us, I mean the American people.
It seems that this is still the main concern on the part of many people in the United States when they see these conflicts, foreign conflicts, even in Venezuela.
Well, I think in a sense, this is a refutation of Senator Scott's assertion that Venezuelans want to get rid of Maduro. We've seen this kind of stupid thinking before. So when the United States invaded Iraq, people predicted that we would be greeted with flowers and dancing and joy in the streets and so forth. And that was not the case. Iraq had a very bad government under Saddam Hussein, far worse than the Maduro government. And yet Iraqis did not welcome foreign liberation or invasion. It was not really liberation in their view. So what we're hearing here is that the people of Venezuela, like the people of Vietnam, are not in sync with American views of them, and therefore entering a war in Venezuela could be entering a long-term guerrilla war in which there would be many American casualties for no useful result. And I think that's what Mr. McGee is saying, in addition to making the point that disinformation is very much part of covert action. And it is, unfortunately, particularly under current circumstances, very largely directed at American domestic audiences.
Donald Trump, ambassador, he talked with Vladimir Putin just hours ago. And yesterday and the day before yesterday, he was sending that some sort of messages to Russia that I'm going to send Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine, and I'm getting prepared to do that. But finally, he had a phone call. It seems that Vladimir Putin called him, and one of the main objectives of the call was the Tomahawk missiles, and he said that you don't do that. In my opinion, they don't have the transcript is not out, but the main one of the main objectives of the call was the Tomahawk missiles. If the United States decides to send them, that would hugely change everything that is going on in Ukraine. And today we have Zelensky in Washington talking to Donald Trump. Remember last time they talked to each other, we saw some sort of panic in Europeans. It seems this time that didn't happen because Zelensky is in Washington talking to Donald Trump. Do you think that if Zelensky doesn't get what he wants to get from the United States, we're going to see the same sort of panic in Europeans to come again and put pressure on Washington?
Well, I think the Europeans are really playing a very foolish game here. I'm sure that the reason President Putin called President Trump was indeed to caution him against the provision of tomahawks. It is exactly, of course, the case now that anything that Ukraine fires a long-range drone or other long-range attack on Russia, it does with the assistance of American intelligence. It couldn't do it without that. It could not operate the tomahawks itself. They would have to be operated by American soldiers. So this would be a double escalation, a direct American attack on Russia with American forces, and second, an escalation of the war against Russia with a more formidable long-range attack capability given to Ukraine. I don't think this is going to happen. If I do not know what President Putin said to President Trump, but it has always been my belief that if tomahawks were introduced in Ukraine, that the Russians would counterattack the intelligence capabilities that support them in Ukraine. That is, there are Americans there who are supporting Ukraine clandestinely. The Russians know where they are. They have not targeted them particularly. I think they will. So this escalation, if it occurs, is very serious. What the Europeans would think about it, I cannot say, because they seem to be just fine with attacking Russia. They seem to assume that they can do so with impunity. And yet, if you recall, during the discussion of German provision of the Taurus missile to Ukraine, the Russians made it very clear that if that missile was provided, they would destroy the factory where it is produced in Germany. So in other words, they would attack Germany, not just Ukraine. And that was enough to persuade the Germans to take a different approach. They shipped parts to Ukraine, which were assembled there, and sure enough, the assembly plant was blown up by the Russians. So I think this is a very dangerous ploy. It represents desperation on the part of Ukraine, which is grasping for any way to halt its slow defeat. And the Tomahawk would not provide that. It would simply provide the Russians with a compelling argument for escalating in return.